I'm Jody, founder of the travel blog Family Travel Magazine and mom of two college students.
I'm Anna, owner of Waves and Wandering LLC, which is a full service travel agency. I'm also mom to 3 daughters and grandmother to 3 grandchildren. Welcome to our show. Like most people, we don't always have someplace to go. So we are right now more in planning mode. We've got a couple of trips on the horizon that I know that we're going to talk about as they get closer. But for right now, we're going to dive right into a topic that is super interesting. And actually, for 2025, it's one of the trending topics. The topic is travel dupes. Now, if you don't know what a travel dupe is, and I would not expect everybody to know because I don't think I knew until very recently, but basically what it is you go to a destination that is less crowded and more budget friendly than the actual destination. But your travel dupe destination gives you the same kind of cultural experience. You might see similar architecture, some of the same activities that you would at that more popular and much more expensive destination. For example, instead of Iceland, you could go to Western Colorado. They both have cold weather, hot springs, a lot of the same activities. And the same thing over in the UK. Instead of going to London, which is super expensive and super crowded, go to Liverpool, which gives you the same like British charm, fun history, but it's much lower in price. There are many more less crowded restaurants. There's just, you have access to a lot of the same things that you're looking for in these destinations without actually going to these destinations. So the first question I have when you're talking about some of these travel dupes, Jody, is how do you find one? How do you know that it's a travel dupe?
I think with this type of thing, this is either like a word of mouth or a research thing. So, I think a lot of people now find travel ideas through social media, whether it's where friends of theirs travel, but you can also just search online and you'll find lots of different articles about, you know, various travel dupe destinations. So, I suggest just kind of do your research unless you see something specific that you want to visit
And
while
that's
you're.
just kind of a Google search, right? You could just go on Google and can you just type in travel dupes and something will come up?
Sure, or you can look specifically at your destination and see kind of other destinations that are recommended, play around with things, search for, similar to and that type of thing.
And if you're going to look at these travel dupes, like say in your head, you've got, I just want to see the Eiffel Tower. You're not going to see the Eiffel Tower at these travel dupes.
Right. You're gonna get like the feel for the place. You're gonna get maybe some of the cultural aspects or some of the landscape aspects, but you're not gonna get those attractions. You're not gonna go to the Louvre, you're not gonna go to the Eiffel Tower. But you might still be able to see some really fantastic museums. Some of these that you'll see in like the Louvre, they have artwork in other places as well. So yeah, if you really want the real deal Eiffel Tower, you got to go to Paris.
Yeah, but you can still find Parisian feelings and atmospheres without necessarily the Eiffel Tower in a lot of different places. Like you don't just have to go to Paris to get a very French vibe.
Right. I mean, you might see sidewalk cafes, you might have French food, you might see the type of artwork that you would see in Paris, the type of artists. So that type of thing, the general feel for the destination is what you're getting with the travel dupe and not necessarily specific destination attractions.
I love the fact that you might be able to get some of the same vibe that you would if you spent a ton of money by not spending a ton of money. So, are there other benefits of the travel dupes besides just saving money, or is saving money really a huge thing?
Well, I think there's a lot of things. First of all, money is a huge aspect. So, if you're looking at, and we're just going to go with Paris because that's kind of what we've been going with. If you're looking at Paris and you are from, the East Coast of the United States, like we are, a good dupe could be something in Quebec City or Montreal. That's going to be significantly less expensive than getting on a plane and flying to Paris because you can probably drive there and you'll have more flexibility with dates. I wouldn't necessarily do a travel dupe unless you are getting some benefit, but
Mhm.
another benefit could be crowds. So some of these destinations that are super popular, something like Santorini or Paris, especially with things going on, when there are things going on in Europe that make them even more popular, that's the type of benefit you'll have, is that you're not quite going all out full crowds. The other thing too I would say is with a travel dupe, I talk a lot about family travel, little kids. You might not want to hop on a plane and go to Paris. You might not be sure how your kids will do on that type of flight. That's a commitment. It's generally an overnight flight. So being able to hop in your car and go to Quebec City or take the hour or two flight up there, it definitely makes it easier. And then if you love that culture and you love the feel of that city, then okay, now I can spring for Paris, and maybe we'll take a year or two to budget and plan.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I like that you get a taste of the thing that you think you want. I have friends that just recently went to Paris, and, because they've just recently reopened the cathedral at Notre Dame, it's mobbed. It's absolutely
Right.
crowded.
Right.
And it was super, super difficult for them to access some of the more popular attractions. And really, it wasn't even so much Paris that they wanted to see. They just wanted like the French vibe. They really just wanted to sit and have coffee and little French pastries and stuff. They just wanted that vibe. And instead, what they got was, I mean, they got the flu because there were so many people, but they got a massive amount of crowds. They got a lot of stuff they weren't expecting. Like my one friend had no idea there would be so much cigarette smoke and stuff. I mean, we
Right.
don't have that as often here in the
Right.
United States. So it was a very unexpected experience. So they came back not loving Paris as much as they thought they would. But I think Quebec City, like you talked about, I think that would have been a really good solution for them.
It really is. It's one of my favorite places to visit because you really do feel like you are in Europe. And have you been there?
I have not, no.
No, it's really so we can drive there from here in Boston. It's probably, I want to say it's about 9 hours, but you can also fly. And it's just, if you stay in the old city, it's super walkable. You've got those sidewalk cafes, you've got the bakeries, you've got, full French culture, you've got the river, there's museums. It's a fantastic place to visit. And honestly, you feel like you're in Europe.
I think that's going on my list of weekend trips to try because we have talked about doing, Montreal and Quebec City and just kind of having a different experience. We've done a lot of Canadian cities, but never gone. I don't speak French. It's definitely something that I would want to do. I also think it's important. My daughter loves Napa Valley, California. She absolutely loves it. She even went while she was pregnant with one of my grandchildren for I don't know what reason, because you can't drink wine, which is the huge draw.
Well, I took an
And
infant to Napa Valley, so I can fully appreciate.
I mean, it's definitely one of like our in the United States, it's a destination a lot of people go to.
Right.
And while I was researching travel dupes, especially Napa, because I know it's someplace that my daughter loves to go, I was like, okay, well, what would be a reasonable destination? And the first thing that popped up for me was Western Cape, South Africa. And I'm thinking, how is this reasonable? I can be, here in California in 4 or 5 hours, and, the flight is going to be way cheaper. What is the motivation to South Africa? But when you start to think about it, first of all, five-star luxury hotel in Western Cape, South Africa is less than $200 a night. And honestly, most of them you can
Wow.
get for about 120, 150. I know in Napa that she easily spends 7 or 800 dollars for the same level of hotel that she would get in Western Cape. And it's not just that, it's also a meal. Like I compared basically the same meal at a steakhouse in Western Cape to a steakhouse in Napa. And for the same exact steak dinner, you're talking about $14 compared to $70. But beyond just the pricing, the chance to go to South Africa and I'm not a huge wine drinker, but I do know South African wines are some of the most enjoyed wines in the world. They have such an excellent reputation. Aside from the opportunity to go and experience all of the South African wine culture, just the South African culture, you're going to get the safaris, you're going to get the vibrance that you don't necessarily have here. I don't know that travel dupes necessarily are all about money. Like you said with Quebec City, it's not as crowded as going to Paris. You're still getting a lot of the stuff that you want. And you might end up overall saving money even if you do go farther.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good point because, we did Napa Valley quite a bit before we had kids, and I loved it, and I loved going there. But you could also potentially use a travel dupe if you do have a destination that you love to visit, and maybe you just wanna try something similar.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So, how do you know if the travel dupe is going to be any good? Like, it's going to be a complete waste of money if I decide to go to one of these travel dupes and I get nothing of what I.
Right. So I think first of all, you really have to think about what you want out of this trip. And like we mentioned, you're not going to see the Mona Lisa, you're not going to see the Eiffel Tower, you're not going to see, major attractions. So you have to think about what it is that you really want. Do you want to go and be a tourist and see Buckingham Palace and see Piccadilly Circus? Or do you really want to get a feel of the culture and the food and the language if we're talking Paris and Quebec City? So that's what's most important, I think, is just really thinking about ultimately what it is you are trying to get out of this vacation. And if it is, I want my kids to see these specific things, then maybe this travel dupe isn't for you. But if it's more the feel, then absolutely.
Yeah, and I know the Grand Canyon is obviously a super popular attraction in the United States. It's something that I think everyone should see. But if you're a last minute planner, you may not be able to find accommodations out there, especially in the summer months because it's super, super crowded. There are just some things that may be out of your reach for various reasons, whether it's the distance or whether it's the expense or whether it is that you didn't plan ahead and now there's nothing available for you to go and do. But when you compare like the Grand Canyon to other places like Letchworth in New York, it's a state park. They also have a canyon. It's it's beautiful, it's absolutely gorgeous, but you're looking at 1,000,000 visitors a year there versus 5,000,000 visitors a year to the Grand Canyon, and you're still getting the same feeling and the same vibe. You're just not getting the Grand Canyon.
Right. Right. So it really just depends on what you're looking for because I know people have bucket lists of, they want to see the Grand Canyon, they want to see, certain museums. If that's really what you're going for, then this isn't for you. But, maybe you're trying to plan something and especially when you've got, kids, younger kids and you're just, you're not in the position to plan, a trip to France a year and a half in advance. There's really a lot of fantastic options of places that have similar feel that are, closer and less expensive and less crowded. And I do think for a lot of these, social media is the way to go in terms of just kind of finding these things.
Okay, before we wrap up travel dupes, because you have boots on the ground in Quebec City, give me a little bit of a side by side. What am I getting when I go there?
Sure. So Quebec City, it's a city in the province of Quebec, and it's made up, like a lot of cities, of an old section and a new section. So primarily, I'm talking about the old section, and that is really where you're going to see some of these quaint type restaurants and stuff. When you see pictures of Quebec City, you're typically seeing the old city, and within the city, it's a partially walled city. So you'll see within the walls or outside the walls, and if you're within the walls you can walk everywhere. It is hilly, there's cobblestones, but it's very, very walkable. Outside, you need to know a little bit about where the location is, but essentially what you're getting with Quebec City is beautiful hotels. So these range from the Chateau Frontenac, which of course everyone is familiar with, the beautiful, castle hotel. But then you're also getting like cute little quaint hotels where, your restroom might be down the hall. So you really have a wide range of types of hotels. And then right outside the walls, but still super walkable, are where you find some of the chain hotels. So I know there's a Hilton, I think there's a Marriott. And so those, if you're a rewards program member or you're just kind of loyal to a hotel chain, you'll still be able to find those options. There are tons and tons of food options. And we're talking French food, traditional Quebec food, things like crepes and, but you can even find places that have like burgers and pizzas and stuff like that if that's more what you're into. In terms of language, generally everyone does speak French. Within the old city, which is the most touristy area, you will find people who are bilingual and who will speak to you in English if you need that. There's some really phenomenal museums. There's the Plains of Abraham, which I highly recommend. My family went and they absolutely loved it. It's super educational. There's there are some museums which are so fun. And then there's also, if you go in the summer, there's a little island that you can take. It's like a little bus tour you take, and it's kind of a foodie type island, and there's just fantastic little restaurants and stuff that they'll take you on a food tour of. Some of the best ice cream I've had in my entire life was on one of these food tours, and I dream of that ice cream. And then there's also Montmorency Falls, which is a falls area you can walk up to the top, and it's really fun. It's just a great place to visit.
I would say, based solely on hearing you describe Quebec City, travel dupes are not a waste of time or money. It's definitely something to consider. And not only that, but you might find something that you love at least as much as you love the idea of Paris or some far off, distant place that's going to cost you a fortune and you're going to be crowded and maybe not enjoy it as much.
Right, and yeah, I mean, the big benefit to Quebec City, at least for us, that you can drive there, so you save so much money, you don't have to rent a car, you don't have to and, like, I mean, it is very walkable, so you're not necessarily needing the car once you arrive there, but yeah, it's a great trip.
If you have any questions about travel dupes or how to get there or how to find them, just drop us a line. Let us know. We'll talk about it in one of our future episodes. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Mail call, question stories, let's hear it all. From you to us, it's wonder and chat. So grab a seat, let's talk just like that.
We're gonna jump into some questions we had from our last episode, which you'll probably remember was all about traveling to Alaska and also our vacation checklist episode. So, with Alaska, the question was, what's the most important thing to pack for an Alaska?
I think we went over in our episode that it's really hard to pack for Alaska because the big thing is you have to pack layers. You have to be prepared for any kind of weather. But if I had to recommend, the one thing you absolutely have to include is some level of waterproof attire. A lot of the places that you will visit in Alaska are part of a rainforest. And just by its very nature, it's wet, it's rainy, and you will get soaked if you're not properly prepared. And I'm talking about waterproof shoes, maybe an umbrella, a poncho, a raincoat. You definitely need to bring waterproof stuff.
It's good to know because I know, I've traveled places without having rain gear and you'll be miserable. Like you just have to go out and buy this stuff and you're not necessarily getting exactly what you want.
I wonder if people just are praying for such perfect weather that they don't want to pack the rain gear and risk jinxing the good weather, or if it's just the fact that we're already overpacked. We've already got too much stuff. I can't even imagine having to now throw in ponchos and rain boots and all the other stuff. But especially for Alaska, you want to have that stuff. Not only in bad weather is it an extra layer that might keep you warm, just the fact that you're not soaking wet is going to keep you warm. So you definitely want to have that stuff with you.
That's good to know, definitely. And there's, you can find some great packable travel rain gear. So it's just a matter of being prepared and you don't necessarily have to, although it's totally fine too. You don't have to throw on those, clear ponchos if you want something else. There's some more stylish but still very packable options.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that we might want to talk about, to our listeners in another episode, because I don't know that we all know how to pack for weather. I know that when we go to a beach vacation, we think it's super easy to just throw in a sundress, a pair of shorts, a t-shirt, your sandals, but that might not be all you need. And immediately what comes to mind is when we went to Lookout Key. I didn't pack sneakers for that vacation because I was going to the beach, but it would have
Right.
been so great to have those sneakers to walk over to the death march from the ship to the sand. It would have been nice to have those sneakers. So I think that's a whole explorable topic. So stay tuned. We might cover that.
It was the same thing with Costa Rica too. I mean, there was a lot of rain. We were there during the rainy season and having shoes that dried quickly that had like more grip on them than a standard sandal that I would normally wear on a vacation. Super, super important. In Greece, I know I put my trusty, sandals on that I always go everywhere with, and I almost like slid down a hill because
Oh,
it was so
no.
slippery. So,
Yeah.
uh, footwear is another one of those topics I think that is very important because if your feet aren't comfortable, then you're just not going to have a good time.
So true.
So, another question, and we had talked quite a bit about the fact that when you do go on a cruise and you book an excursion, those excursions are expensive. So, why are they so expensive? Do you have any idea? And is there like any way to kind of cut costs on that and do them cheaper?
So there are a couple reasons why Alaska excursions are expensive. The very first thing being is the Alaska season is super, super short. And the people in Alaska can only really make the tourism dollars in a limited time frame. So just by the very nature that these excursions are a little more exclusive than, going to Atlantis and the Bahamas or whatever, they're going to be more expensive. But also the logistics of putting the Alaska excursions together is just a whole level of stuff that most of us aren't familiar with. They do have to be ready when the roads are slippery or when a tree falls over or if you do a whale cruise and there are no whales. There's different equipment that they have. There's just different methods of doing excursions that they have there that make them a little more expensive. And are there ways to do them cheaper? As a travel agent, I tell my clients all the time, I feel safer doing the excursions through your cruise ship.
I do
I
too.
think your best level of protection, making sure the excursion is actually going to go, making sure if there's a problem on the excursion that someone is looking out for you, making sure if the excursion is late getting back to the ship, they either will hold the ship for you when it's feasible, or they will make sure you get to the next destination. I always recommend that you do the excursions through the ship. The truth is, there are always opportunities to do the excursions independently, and they are 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, less expensive to do them on your own. You can find them on different websites like Viator. You can find them if you belong to like a Facebook group for your upcoming cruise or your upcoming Alaska vacations. Sometimes they will let tour operators advertise in those groups. You really could just do a Google search for whale watching in Alaska and you will come up with dozens upon dozens of them. The only thing that I will say about doing those independent excursions is really do your research. Make sure you read the reviews, make sure they're a reputable company. If you can, and this is not easy to find out if they've ever been a vendor for a cruise line and the cruise line dropped them, because that's
Oh, that's a good
usually a
point.
red flag. But yeah, there's definitely a way to do them cheaper. You just have to understand going into Alaska that the excursions are going to be way more expensive than the beach vacations.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree that I think booking through your cruise line is the safest. And for me, I feel more comfortable doing that. The other thing too, and I don't know if this happens in Alaska as much as it might happen like in the Caribbean, but if for some reason your cruise ship changes its itinerary or doesn't make a stop or the stop changes the time that it's going to be arriving or these things happen. We obviously have experienced this ourselves in the Caribbean. I'm not sure if Alaska is less likely for this to happen, but it is nice to know that you are covered. So I would always look at the cancellation policy and what happens if you do have to make a last minute change.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely important. And, I know somebody who had an excursion booked through an independent company that was they were supposed to meet at the pier right off the ship at 8 a.m. But the ship encountered some unfavorable weather the night before and didn't get to the pier until almost 10. So obviously, the tour conductor of the independent excursion didn't wait the extra 2 hours. And then
Right.
when that person tried to get their money refunded because they didn't show up, the tour operator was like, but the tour still went and you didn't cancel it 48 hours before.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I think you have a higher degree of protection when you book through the ship. We also had some questions related to our vacation checklist. And somebody mentioned the fact that suitcases are so expensive sometimes. Do you think if you spend more on your suitcase, you're not going to have any problems with it? It's going to be one of those suitcases that the wheels won't fall off or the zipper is going to work indefinitely. Why are you spending more money on a suitcase?
So I think, first of all, there's no guarantees ever because I've seen how sometimes these things are handled, and you never know. I personally have had much more success with more expensive suitcases, but this is another thing, and we've talked about this a lot in this episode. You want to look at reviews, right? I get, I get a message, I want to say once a week, asking me about suitcases. It's probably my number one question that people ask about because everyone who knows me personally knows that I love my suitcases. I would have like a collection if I could have a room full of colorful, bright, limited edition color suitcases. I would. I think, this depends, right? You need a quick garment bag because you're going to a wedding and you're throwing a suit and you're probably never going to use a garment bag again. By all means, go and pick up one cheap, borrow one. With carry-ons, since you're typically the one that's going to be handling it, you might think you have some control, but like we've talked about in the past, those can often get taken. You can't rely on that. I recommend spending the money on good quality suitcases if you know that you're going to use them on a regular basis. Definitely.
I would have to agree. I think in my experience, and we have been in situations where we've lost a wheel or something's happened and we've run to like a Walmart or a Target at the last minute and just bought whatever suitcase was on the shelf. Those are the ones that I hate. Those are the ones that if you come to my house, they're stacked up in my garage in case we ever have an emergency need for a suitcase that I don't mind losing. So I definitely would agree with you there. Have you ever used, and I don't even know if you'll know what I'm talking about, a Navy style sea bag, the green duffel bags that sailors carry. Have you ever used one of those?
I haven't used one of those. I think if you were to use one of those, I would probably recommend using packing cubes to keep everything kind of, unwrinkled and neat and organized. But yeah, no, I've never used one of those.
I think that's an awesome idea. So both of one daughter works on a cruise ship. And when she first went on her contract, she thought it was a great idea to take it because it packs down to nothing. You can store it
Right.
under your bed or in a drawer or wherever. It just folds up down to nothing. My other daughter is considering it for a European vacation. And her reasoning behind it is she has 3 little kids and she wants the hand-free aspect of it. So I think if you can commit to it, because I know one of the complaints is you do have to wear it on your back and it can be heavy. I mean, if you're thinking that, you have up to 50 pounds that you can shove into this thing in order to check it, you're going to shove 50 pounds in it, but now you're going to have to carry it everywhere you go. So it's a super inexpensive way to purchase a piece of luggage. But when you're buying luggage, sometimes it's better to spend a little bit more and get all of the features and not necessarily worry about how cheap it is.
Have you seen the suitcases by the company called Baboon to the Moon?
I haven't.
So they're super cool. They're backpacks, but they open like a suitcase would open. So instead of kind of stuffing it from the top, they open from the side and you can pack it like a suitcase, but then you wear it on your back. And they have
That's
various
cool.
sizes that work for a personal item or carry on. So those they're made of maybe they're more of a like shiny material, so they might have
Mhm.
like some water resistance, probably not waterproof, but at least a little splash protection. And they're super stylish. They're really fun.
Yeah, and a lot of these duffel bags are not waterproof. I mean, they're just
Right.
canvas.
Right.
So, I mean, it might take a lot of water to get in them, but the water's going to get in.
Now let's dive into the latest travel news and updates, from exciting cruise announcements to must-know travel tips. Here's what's making waves this week.
Let's talk latest in travel news. And there was recently an article in the Wall Street Journal on frequent traveler programs. And this is something that everybody should be familiar with: a frequent traveler program, whether it's a frequent flyer thing or a hotel loyalty program. So why don't you give us the gist of the article?
Sure. So the article really focused on frequent flyer programs and talked about how, people aren't necessarily flocking to these programs anymore. Now, I will say personally, I feel like if you fly on an airline, if you go to a hotel, sign up for the program, it's usually free. There might be a little perk. There's no risk in doing that. So I would still highly recommend that. But what it's saying is that people aren't necessarily chasing those benefits. So typically with the frequent flyer program, you need to hit so many miles or so many flights or whatever. And it talked a lot about how Millennial and Gen Z travelers specifically, which we know are starting to travel more and more, don't necessarily want to be loyal to one airline. And being in these programs, typically to get to those, levels where you're seeing benefit, you do have to be loyal. They're also talking about, a lot of people will use a branded credit card from the airline. Those are, you fly frequently like I do. I mean, we've got the flight attendants waving those flyers in the air all the time. They typically are either free or come with a small fee, and might come with some perks like being able to check bags for free or whatever. But what it said is that this generation is preferring really general rewards credit cards. So, you might be able to take those points and use them for any airline or for any hotel chain that participates in those rewards. And there's also, we're seeing hotel or airlines, they often offer lounge access for people at the higher levels of these programs.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing lounges that are not airline branded. The Chase Sapphire Lounge, for instance, is one of those examples where it doesn't matter what airline you're flying on as long as it's accessible from that terminal. And so people are generally kind of preferring that.
Are people not showing loyalty because they're price shopping? Because like I know out of Philly now, it's really hard to stick with one airline, even to someplace simple like Orlando, because the flight schedules have changed so much. I just may not be able to get the times. What's motivating the millennials? What's motivating the millennials and the Gen Z travelers to not be loyal?
It didn't specifically say in the article, but my guess would definitely be pricing and schedule. I think it's not so much, in the past, I think people have said, well, I'll go with the time that might be an hour or 2 hours different than what I would prefer, or maybe I'd pay a little bit more because I'm chasing this status. And now the status isn't necessarily worth it, or it's extremely difficult to obtain.
That's for sure. We were just looking at reward points for a flight, and the number of points required to even do one segment of a flight almost makes it that you have to do a dozen flights before you
Right.
get to that level.
Right. And then, I know with JetBlue, for instance, I've flown JetBlue. I have Mosaic status on JetBlue, and I've flown them several times in the past few months. And it seems like when they announce Mosaic boarding, and we talked boarding before, but half the plane gets up. I mean, half the boarding area gets up, and they do have the status. There isn't as necessarily as much of a benefit to being a member of that group because it's not as elite anymore.
And how do you think these lounges are? We walked through Fort Lauderdale Airport a couple of weeks ago, and there was almost a Disney level line out the door of people waiting to get into the lounge. So are the lounges being impacted by these more general rewards?
I think it depends, but I've seen cases where I've been told a lounge was full. I've had cases where the lounge is full, will text you when you can get in, which is, when you're not, I'm not at the airport for the day, right? Like, I'm not going to go home and wait for my text. It's like, I want to go in the lounge now. But I also have seen these lounges, especially, have you been to one of the Chase Sapphire lounges?
No, I'm one of those anxious travelers, and when I get to the airport, I want to be at my gate, even if I'm 3 hours early, because I want to be there when they make the announcement that they're changing the gate. Like, I just want to be there.
Yeah, so they opened this Chase Sapphire Lounge in Boston, and they've since opened others. It really is. It's a beautiful lounge. It's huge. It has tons of amenities. I had honestly the best pumpkin pancakes there I think I've ever had in my. I don't even like pancakes, and these pancakes were phenomenal.
Oh, wow.
Totally included. But again, it didn't matter what airline I was on. So these types of things. But again, you might have to wait, especially like this was super early in the morning. So it wasn't, it wasn't very crowded. But throughout the day, I know that they do have a line, and I'm not going to wait in a line to get into a lounge because I just don't have that much time.
Yeah. And I'm finding that, even with like a pre-check option, it's still by the time you get through security and your bags are checked and whatever, and you get to your gate, you don't really have that much time anymore.
Right. Right. You really don't.
We would love to hear what your opinion is on these frequent flyer programs or frequent traveler programs. So just drop us a message and let us know how you travel. And I think that's it. Don't forget to tune in next time. We have a great show lined up for you. We are going to talk to you about how to navigate Disney crowds. That's definitely something that you're going to want to chat about, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Wander and Chat. If you're enjoying the show, Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on Apple Podcasts. Subscribing means that you will never miss an episode, whether it's our weekly chats or some surprise bonus content when the travel bug takes us off schedule. Stay in the loop and be the first to hear all about the travel tips, news, and stories that we have to share. And while you're at it, we'd love it if you left us a quick rating or review. It really helps us find more listeners like you and to fine-tune our content so you like it better. Thanks for your support and happy travels.